Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. Through our first bleed to our last, we come to know ourselves more deeply. This is a platform to reclaim the sacredness of all of it. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach, specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. All right. Hey, women. Welcome back to the second season of the Moon Baby Magic podcast. I am so excited to be here with you all for this next season, which is seriously chock full of really inspiring women's stories. I know every single woman's story is so inspiring, and this season we're coming to you with a really beautiful variety of stories from women I know, women I don't know, women who I kind of know, and women who you might recognize and know too. And yeah, what a beautiful winter it's been. So as some of you know, the podcast went on winter break, which is really an ode to this seasonal and cyclical living that I share so much about. It was really important for me to practice what I preach and slow down in the winter months of late December through this, when this podcast is coming out in March, to really create the vision of what I wanted to create in this next turn of the wheel of the year. So for me, winter is initially a time of slowing down and then a time of really letting those dream seeds take form so that I have vision and clarity of what I want to create for spring and summer and into autumn. And that really is just like the menstrual phase of our cycle, where at first it's this rest and surrender and this deep turning away. And then eventually you get the vision and clarity for what comes next. Now, not everyone finds menstruation to be this kind of portal. You really do have to create time and space for it. But I always encourage that, of course. Your bleed is a beautiful time for you to get clarity on what's important to you and what you want to create. And one of the things that I got clarity that I wanted to create during these winter months is a new program that launches on March 24th called Intentional Maidenhood. So on this podcast, we share so many stories of first bleeds and of those formative years. Some women share their birth stories, and a lot of women share about what they did in their maiden years, so those years before motherhood, and what perhaps they wish they had known, and the changes that you go through between maiden and mother. And so I teamed up with a friend of mine, Laura, who is a mother and who really inspired me to make the most of my maiden years, because while she did do a lot, like building her business and moving to Peru and meeting the love of her life, like calling in an alliance partnership in her maiden years, there were certain things she wished she would have honored more that she didn't realize until she became a mother. So the past 2 years of my life, and maybe even a little longer, I have been really kind of going hard on creating the life of my dreams. And so building this business being one of them. And if you're watching the video, you can see I'm recording in this gorgeous open air space with my sun hat on because I moved to Hawaii. It's kind of temporary, but we'll see how long term it is. And I'm working on a farm. I have the freedom and capability to do this because, one, I created a business that can support me anywhere. And also because I've cultivated the courage to really trust my heart and follow my dreams. I've built up a spiritual practice that allows me to trust my life. And I've gotten my health to a place where I can really thrive no matter where I go. My nourishment really grounds me. I don't have painful periods, like those health things that can sometimes really hold you back from actualizing your dreams in whatever subtle ways or big ways. I don't deal with a lot of that anymore. Now, I did actually have some bloating when I first got here because of travel, and I was able to be with that, and luckily it's not there anymore. But what it reminded me of is, wow, I don't really deal with that anymore, and I used to think that was so normal. So this program Laura and I have created, Intentional Maidenhood, is the 12-week program to transform your life, to heal your cycle, to get into the best health that you've been in, to cultivate your passions, like figure out what it is you really care about and build your life around that. So I'll really be diving deep into understanding your cycle from the physiological, the energetic, the emotional lens, holistic health. So prioritizing your health, your nourishment, your hydration, your nervous system, doing all of these healing practices to feel like your most vibrant and healthy self. And then Laura and I will both be going deeply into purpose and passion. And we'll also be having a whole section on relationships because for me, that is really the most important thing. So we'll be diving into sisterhood, how to host women's circles, how to call in your sisterhood, as well as what to look for in a potential partner. So calling in aligned partnerships and a little bit about intentional and conscious dating. So this program starts March 24th. I really invite you, if you feel the call, to join us. It's going to be a really special container, and it's all going to culminate actually at the halfway point of the program in a retreat in Peru where Laura lives. So the Nourished and Thriving Women's Retreat is happening May 19th through 26th. And in this retreat, we're going to be diving into a lot of the topics from the program, but you're also going to be really nourished with massages, with yoni steams, with sister circles, with visiting sacred sites and ceremony, and really grounding into sisterhood, which for me has really been the biggest catalyst of all of my dreams coming true. So I invite you to tap into this energy of creation, of womanhood, of health and happiness, and realize that the life of your dreams actually is yours for the taking. So I have really honed in on this for the past few years and sought out many teachers, cultivated many tools, and I'm bringing them all to you in 12 transformative weeks. So whether you're a maiden and wanting to do the program, or you're a maiden or mother and feel called to the retreat is for maidens and mothers. We're actually going to have childcare available, and the retreat is very mother friendly. So you'll be able to feel like you can actually drop in deeply, and there will be activities for your kids to have fun too. So both of those links will be in the show notes. And yeah, I hope to see you there. I would love to hug you in person or smile at you across the screen. And with that all being said, I would love to jump into our first episode of this season. So today on the podcast, we have the dynamic and inspiring Rebecca Cohen. If you know Rebecca today, you know her as a wise woman, herbalist, authentic midwife, and pelvic care practitioner operating outside of the system and hosting women's circles for her community in Louisville, Kentucky. What you might not know is Rebecca's past as an OBGYN and struggling with things like prolapse herself due to the rigorous workload that did not stop, even in her 5 postpartums in 8 years. Now Rebecca's in her perimenopausal years, and this episode is chock full of her wisdom from a lifetime of humbly learning the ways of her body and raising her daughters to know their bodies too. I know you all will receive so much from this episode, so let's dive into season 2. Hey, Rebecca, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I know, I'm so happy to have you here too. I know we're going to have some interesting conversations, and I'm excited to hear more about your stories.
Yeah, it took a little while for us to get here, so I'm glad the stars finally aligned, or the moon, or whatever it was.
I know sometimes this happens with women coming on the podcast, but I always just trust that the moment needed to happen when it needed to happen. So yeah, so as I was mentioning to you before we hit record, I'd love to just start by chatting a little bit about what phase of life you're in, what phase of your cycle you're in. And I know that's like a really liminal space for you right now. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so the phase of my cycle, my cycles are beginning to stretch out. So I'm in technically perimenopause, and it's a wild ride. Sometimes I think like 2023, I only had 4 or 5 cycles the whole year. And then I think I had one in January 2024 and then one in April. And I was like, oh, this is it. I'm probably going to be done. And then I actually started bleeding Matriarch Rising Festival when I was there. So with all those women, boom. And I was like, of course.
I
But
was
not
too.
that. I kicked in. 25 days later, had another one. 26 days later, had another one. I started and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Here we go. I'm back on. And then I think I had 3 or 4. And then now I'm at day 85. The longest gap I've ever had before was 87 days. And I haven't ovulated yet. So even when my cycles stretch, I could tell usually I ovulate, and then about 2 days, 2 weeks later, I get my cycle. Even when they were stretching out to 38 or 50, can tell. And so I haven't had any signs of real ovulation yet. So I'm wondering, but every single one, is this the last? Maybe that was my last. Maybe that was it. Or yeah. And so I'm like, I guess I'm pre-ovulatory. if I'm
Yeah.
going to ovulate again and I'm going to have another cycle. I feel like I might. I feel like I might have a couple in me, but I'm Jewish and I choose to do the Jewish ritual bath, which is the mikvah for women. And that, yeah, every time I go now and I do like my post-bleed sacred ritual bathing, I'm like, okay, it might be the last time I'm here. And I just feel like that every single time.
I don't know too much about this ritual bath. What is that?
Yeah, it's so there are spiritual bathing practices from around the world that people have seen, whether it's baptism or like in India, bathing in the Ganges River. And Jewish history has a really deep history of bathing, and it includes men and women, but in particular for women. And it has been sometimes like people are shocked to hear that I do it because some ways it's called the purity ritual. And so that you don't, from the time you have your period ends till 7 days later, that some of the Orthodox and ultra Orthodox Jewish, they don't actually touch, the men and women don't touch.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting if you look at it historically and biblically, that typically that would be your then ovulation time, like when you come back together, potentially
Mhm.
like fiery from not having been together for that time. That's good
Oh,
fertility. I know.
yeah.
But I just found it to be a really beautiful practice for me, a way to honor my body, a way to honor myself post bleed. And I go to what's called the mikveh, and I spend time before I go into the mikveh. I take time to wash my hair and brush it all out. I take time to usually take a bath and really clean, not because I think I'm dirty, but as an honoring of my.
Yeah.
And then you go, and there's a woman there who actually witnesses you, and you say prayers and then immerse yourself in the water 3 times and come out.
Whoa.
I like it. I feel all sparkly afterwards. And yeah.
I love that. I can see how people like could be surprised at thinking because it's like a purity ritual, but I think that it is this natural thing to want to like beautify ourselves after our bleeds. Like I have had this natural ritual of after I bleed, I like to do brush out my hair, do a face mask, do a hair mask, leave that on, like dry brush, get in the shower. Like I do a really big like cleansing ritual too, because it feels like it closes that portal because when you bleed, we're just so in it. It's like an emergence when you come out
It
and like
is.
the rebirth, when the rebirth happens with water, we know that's so I love that.
Yeah. So that's where I am right now. And it's been quite a journey. I don't know how much do you want to start at like my period and my first period and go all the way through, or do you want to delve into perimenopause now, is where I am
Well,
now?
yeah, I'm interested in talking about perimenopause now, and I have a couple questions. So I'm curious with these extended cycles, like you're in this sort of extended follicular pre-ovulatory space. And I really, as a cycling woman, like really feel my energy shift week by week with my cycles. I'm in like that maiden energy, and then I'm in the mother energy, and in the maiden, like I'm in my maiden phase, my follicular phase right now. I'm on day 9. And so I do feel this building energy, this like wanting to plan things. So when you're having these longer cycles, do you feel that the whole time or what's the
No,
energy like?
no. So that's
Okay.
what I imagined, right? I imagined. And it's not. And it's also not. Maybe we'll have to talk about it in a couple of years because what it feels to me right now, it's a little closer. And I think it's because I'm at the beginning, I'm at the true start of potentially like really starting menopause. It feels a little closer to the premenstrual time.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of my priorities are like getting more in line. I don't have that. When you think of that older woman who just doesn't mince words and doesn't have time for stuff. When you typically think of older women or stronger older women they're not still running around saying yes to things they don't want to do. And so it feels super transformational to me right now. It's just wild. It's a wild ride. I'm having some hot flashes, and I'm an herbalist as well. So I've been making this hot flash remedy for years. And I got so excited when I first started having them a couple years ago because I was like, oh, I can try my hot flash remedy. And no, myself, because most of my other all herbal stuff I take myself.
Yeah.
Have like and that was fun. It was my telling women how often to take it and when to take it, all of that kind of changed after that.
Wow.
And then there was a period where my hot flashes went away, like they went away for 6, 8 months, and then they were just starting to come back. And I at first didn't know. And I'm very careful. Okay, talking about menopause and perimenopause in general. So for me, I've been in the natural birth world and the natural herbal world in my community for a long time.
Yeah.
And so when I think about like my colleagues slash friends, like my kids they went to a small Waldorf school. At one point in time, literally every single woman that was pregnant at the Waldorf school was seeing me for care. That was back when I was doing obstetrics care and all that. And so it was like myself, I was having babies that age, my friends were having babies that age, all of that. And we were the more natural minded mamas or whatnot, right? And so now I have mothers who have their teen daughters and maybe they're having challenges with their periods and they bring them into me because the physician just has birth control pills and that's it. So I've walked with a lot of these women in my community, and these women that I've walked with that had natural childbirth, baby wearing mamas, bring their daughters into me. A whole lot of them are on hormone replacement therapy, a whole lot.
Wow.
And there's something that is really still very much unknown. So like when I go back to when I was first doing childbirth stuff, so the late 80s or 90s is mainly when I was learning, when I was becoming a young midwife, that's when I was. So there was like spiritual midwifery, there was Heart and Hands, there were only a couple books and they were in print books at that time, right? So there wasn't even really internet. So I know this really dates me. There was a book called Artemis Speaks. There was a few natural childbirth books that were out, but really truly only a handful. And those were like our Bibles at that time, like what we had. Now it's just all over everywhere. And I'm really grateful for that for my daughters moving forward. But when I've come into the perimenopause space, there's not a lot of books. In the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a big explosion,
Mhm.
but literally like perimenopause, menopause natural book wise, there's one or two. There's very little information.
Wow.
And it's much like many women walk into fear into childbirth. Like I feel like even like my people, like my cohorts and friends and are turning towards patches and or it might be compounded pharmaceutical like estrogen and progesterone and all that, but just a lot. And so if we would have been having this interview a couple of years ago, and what I was saying for a while was like, especially seeing that is never say never. I'm not going to say I'm never going to do that. And really now at this point, I'm going to say I'm never going to do that because I've seen now a lot. And I feel like I went through this 2 or 3 year period as it was happening to me of searching, like if any woman came into me to see me for my services and I'd ask her and she went through the change naturally, I'd be like, oh, tell me about that. Tell me about that. I'd be out on the beach in Hawaii and if I have an older one, oh, tell me about that. There was a good friend of mine who did just recently, and she's a little bit older than me. She's 58. And I'm like, tell me about that because I'm almost like gathering stories
Mm.
because I haven't heard them as much. It reminds me of like my few friends that I had that had natural childbirth and home births, in the 90s. Tell me all about it.
Yeah.
And so, what a big shift for me was I went to a training with Sister Morningstar. It was a birth related training. And in the evenings, she's just like this amazing powerhouse. Like we would start like at 9 in the morning, go all day. There'd be this little lunch break, and then
Wow.
we'd finish usually around 6. And then and then we can stay for talking from 6:30 to 8:30. Like she would be up
Amazing.
the whole time. And so in the sit around while we ate our dinners talking, it's someone else, not me, asked her a question. And so when she had been talking about childbirth and told her own story about childbirth, she talked about how much she loved the contractions, that she never felt so powerful in her life as to when she had the contractions. And the first, she gave birth very young at first, and she actually had a hospital birth where she was strapped down and all of that. And she said, that she felt the most powerful she ever had in her whole life with the contractions, and that she just couldn't keep them coming. Like she just felt so powerful. And so then we're having our evening talk, and somebody asked her, they were like, "Sister, did you have hot flashes?" And so my ears like perking up. And she said, "Yeah, they were just like contractions. I couldn't keep them coming." And I
Whoa.
was, oh, interesting. And since that time, I've actually started to get high. It was so funny because it was almost like they came right after that, where they started up again. And so I've really been thinking about them oh, how can I keep this feeling like this is powerful? And what am I burning? And each time my hot flash comes, I immediately now go into, I release, might be whatever. I release worrying about this. I release being ticked off at my daughter who spoke rude to me a little while ago. Like whatever it is. Like I always start, I'll feel the hot flash come and I'll immediately be, I release. And sometimes it takes me a second to find a release, but mostly it's like right there, I release. And I almost feel like I'm phoenixing out. Like I'm like, and now I'm like, no, I don't want to take hot flash remedy. And I certainly don't want to take any hormones that's going to stop this. What is happening? And I'm in the thick of it and just, wow. It's just been wow. And the more I've deepened into it, the more I feel this like really big transformation. But I do feel, like I said, I feel closer to, I imagined it being all like, yeah, eternal spring or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not. But I have a feeling that this is this transitional part. So I'm curious, like in a few years, when they do actually settle and stop, what does that feel like? And what can I relate that to, like phase cycle wise? But
Yeah.
yeah, right now it seems like the flares, and it really it almost feels like that time either right before you're getting your bleed or right when you're on your bleed that you're wanting to be away. And I'm
Yeah.
feeling that a lot. Like, I'm saying no to this or that today. That's actually what it feels like the most. Like I'm getting super clarity on what is my work and what's mine and what's not, and what do I have the capacity to do. And so even with the night sweats and things, which is where you wake up with a hot flash and you don't, and a lot of times there's sleep disturbances, and so I try to go to bed earlier because if I'm not going to get as much, so I still get enough
Yeah.
sleep that I need.
Yeah.
It's not the way I was like a couple years ago as I started into this. I was like, oh God, I can't sleep. Everything's based around sleep. It's messing up my metabolism. Do you know what I mean? I had all these tropes, and it was cool, just like that one. And we had a couple other menopause like brief conversations with sister, but honestly, that one reframe for me reframed my whole experience as of right now. And I'm like, oh, just because I was feeling sad that the bleeding time was ending. Like I said, when I was at the mikvah, I don't remember when it was, 2 or 3 years ago, when I think it was Nancy with the red skirt, like wearing a red skirt. And so I got a red skirt and I started wearing it during my bleed. So my whole family's aware and all of that. And I was like, shoot, I just got into that. Now I'm stopping bleeding. Like I missed like all these years of that. And so I have this missing part, and something about the way sister said it reframed for me, oh, I'm going to miss this part too. I'm going to miss this part.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, for those of us that have given birth, like it would be amazing to go back and feel an hour's worth of contractions again and feel our baby come through again. And so I'm like, oh, in the future, it's going to be amazing to think about like the hot flashes and what was happening to me during that time. And it was just a really easy reframe. So that's where I am right now.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I love that story. And yeah, Sister Morningstar is such a magical woman. I have so many things I want to say about that. One is just, I think it's really special to be able to be in right relationship with the phase of life you're in and to see the gifts in it, which I think does take some time. It's like hard to see the gifts when you're like first right in it. But I think anytime we can get present with the phase of life that we're in, sometimes I feel that way, like with wanting kids, and it's just not happening for me yet. And just being like, oh, I just want to be a mother. I just want kids. I just want to have a baby. I see someone at the coffee shop. This happened this morning. And I'm like, she's holding her baby. And I'm like, oh, I just want a baby. And I just had a moment where I was like, okay, and I will one day. And right now I have more freedom than I'm ever going to have in my life. And there's so many gifts in this phase of life, and I will miss it. And just to like really appreciate each place that we are is really valuable, because as a woman, we go through these just like giant initiations. And I love the thing about the hot flashes being like the contractions, to allow those to be this like powerful experience and to choose to feel it. And the way that you've created this ritual around what are you releasing with it, and that something just comes up like that just feels so intuitive and right. And of course, like our bodies are doing these things for a purpose. Like it's not random, it's not wrong, it's not something to be fixed. Just because something's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's something to be fixed. And it also reminds me of like ceremony, being in ceremony, because in ceremony, it's like at first things are so awkward and we're like, I just need to get out of this. I need to fix it and something needs a change and I don't want to be here. And then eventually there's a settling and it's okay, I'm here.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's like what these rites of passage are for us, is just the ceremony of moving into the next phase of life. And I love the imagery you shared too of like being the phoenix rising from the ashes. And that's, I've had like two or three women on the podcast who are either like in the same place as you, or I think one woman I've had who's actually gone through and is in her sorceress, almost crone phase of life, where she's gone through the menopause portal fully. And there seems to be this same pattern of the energetic signature is like you are just becoming this fuller version of yourself. And it's like a really fine tuning of being in alignment with that, which is a lot of releasing, like you said, with the hot flashes, and a lot of no, and a lot of trimming down what doesn't work so that it's like closer to your core essence. And it reminds me of that quote that's like, at menarche a girl meets her power, and throughout all her cycling years she practices her power, and at menopause she becomes her power. And I come back to that all the time, because I I really actually have been trying to learn and hear a lot of these menopause stories because they're not out there. And so I'm always so curious. I'm like, wait, tell me about that. And
Too. I've been like, tell me about that. Tell me about that.
yeah.
There's a couple good books out now, and then but then I think it's just going to be story. And then I just hold the prayer that, okay, by the time my daughters are here, there's much more, because it just hasn't been, and it's up. And that's good, because before it wasn't, like, I've definitely had older women say that they didn't feel like they could say in their workplace that they were having a hot flash and
Yeah.
embarrassing to them. They were hiding it and things like that. And so now it was whatever. The New York Times Magazine had a whole thing on menopause, and then Oprah had a whole round table on menopause. And I'm like, oh, that's good. It's okay to say menopause now, but
Yeah.
honestly, so many of those are from the pharmaceutical company, and that really helps. And there's women that really helps and may be best for them. I'm always trying to be, it's especially challenging when it's like, in particular here in town with me, like my circle of women, but I can now say without judgment to any others and just say, yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I think it's great to be able to just know that's your truth, and to even have that, even if other women, if that's not their truth, for them to just see that's an option and that's possible. It's the same with like sovereign birth. For some
Totally.
women to just be like fully claiming that for herself is really inspiring.
Totally. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh. And our rites of passage just build upon each other and build upon each other. And they all have these like really similar themes, which I just love. And I know we're going to get into some of your daughter's menarche stories, but I am curious to hear about your menarche story too.
Yeah, mine was pretty uneventful. I was 12. It was at Thanksgiving, no less. And I did have light blue pants on, um, which is, always a thing. But I remember feeling like a little excited that it was there. And I knew right what to do. I went upstairs and got a pad or whatever, and it was pretty uneventful.
Mm.
I don't really remember when I figured out about tampons, but I was a competitive swimmer. And so and where we were just, but I was like a super like junior national level, like competitive swimmer in high school and stuff. And we would all come after high school and pile into this tiny little changing room, and we all changed. And there would be tampon strings hanging out from all the other swimmers. Like we would see it back and forth. It was just not that big of a deal. I didn't have a lot of, and we'd all come in afterwards to the showers and pull our suits down and be so. I think, which is interesting, but from the swim, I don't know whether it was athletes or swimmers, just in general, like I was used to like being naked in front of other women. I was used to seeing their strings hang down, my string, whatever. But I pretty much plugged it up and didn't get very necessarily in tune with it at all until, so in the late, like my senior year of high school, late 80s, I went to my first dead show. So I spent some time following the Grateful Dead, and so being like,
Wow.
yeah. And then when we hitchhiked, even out, hitchhiked some, was in caravans following the dead around, and then like living out in yurts in the woods in Washington State and things like that. And that's when, oh, let me go before that. I did get on the pill briefly
Oh,
in
wow.
in college. And it was, yeah, I just went and did it when I was in college. And I gave me horrible migraines, awful migraines, and also like vomiting and all of that. And I just kept taking it because I thought I was going to get through it. And then they switched me
Yeah.
to another one and switched me to another one. And so I was on the pill briefly.
Okay.
But then when I was out traveling around, that's when I got more aware of. So there was like Margaret Knopfsinger from the farm. So this is also when I started getting into home birth and the farm. And so the spiritual midwifery book. And then Margaret Knopfsinger had written a book about, who was another one of the women who lived on the farm, about tracking your cycles. So I got that cycle book. And so I started tracking my cycles. So I started tracking my cycles in 95.
Mm.
And I have every cycle from 95 until now. So
Whoa.
I took, sometimes I would just do the start day, the end day, like all the way through. And then then I had a digital thermometer, and the thermometers took a lot longer. And I would just stick my thermometer at my vag. Like when I got up in the morning, I'd stick it at my vag because my mouth, I don't know, it was open, closed, whatever. I just stick it at my vag until it beeped. And then I look at it. And then I filled it in on a piece of paper, like I grafted. And
Wow.
I had graphing for a bunch of them, like chart graphing, my mucus. I checked my cervix. I did all of that and have notes on it for like,
Wow.
to me, like that's my health history. And I do remember once I was in medical school, I was at a conference with some other medical students, and we were all housed like up in Chicago. And I totally had my thermometer. And I like took it down there and took it. And then I just wipe it off on the sheet and put it back in and do my box. I didn't realize like how flipped out they would be, like the other medical students. Like vag temping, but I was like, yeah, this is what I do. And so that's what I did for years and years is I charted. And then I got to the point really to where I didn't have to chart my temperature as much because I could just tell. And sometimes I'd only do it once or twice because I would be, is it like below or above or where am I?
Yeah.
But at first for many, years I did that. So that's what I did. And that's what I also, I stopped. I think when I was a teenager, I took some ibuprofen, stuff like that. It was just like stick the tampon up, take the
Yeah.
ibuprofen, keep going on the pill briefly. But then no matter where I traveled or what I did, I just did that for longer.
That's amazing. I don't think I really know anyone else who's ever done vaginal temping. It's definitely
That's my body temp. And I felt like
a,
and I wouldn't have to worry about, did I sleep with my mouth open? Did I just take a big drink? Whatever.
yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's
Just
so
what I
true.
did. But then you also get to see your mucus because you
That's what
wipe
I
it
was
off.
gonna say is that's a sweet connection point too, because like you are connecting with your body in that way. I just love that, and that you're at this medical conference and you're like, yeah, this is just what I do. Definitely you're just
Then
the
I was like, that probably just grows her out. And then I took it and properly washed it in the sink that time and stuff because otherwise I was just rolling it, wipe it on my sheet, put it up, wash it every once in a while, whatever.
always the black sheep in the medical world. You were. I'm just gonna do things this way.
Yeah, so I did that forever up until and including having my children. And then then it was, for me anyways, pretty easy to tell when I was ovulating and not ovulating and had
Yeah.
that kind of under my belt, if you will. Like sometimes I could just tell from mucus and all of that. And yeah.
Yeah, I do think that's true. Once you've been charting for a while, you get the idea. You're like, I can obviously tell what mucus is fertile and like how long I tend to have this type of mucus before it shifts to more fertile mucus. And that is the beauty of being really intentional for a long period of time when you begin, because you really get to know your body quite intimately. And I love that you said too, like you have all these charts, like that's your health history. It's yeah, that's like we can tell so much from our charts.
I would
That's
see like when I was traveling and I would mark out to the side when I was traveling. I would mark if I had a new partner. Yeah. I'd mark if I got sick, like I'd been
exactly.
ill, all of that. And it was interesting too. It was helpful for me to see. Sometimes even then I was like 28, 29, 30 days, but I'd throw a 38 or 42 in. And the first times you freak out and be like, oh my gosh. But then I'm like, oh yeah, I did that a year ago, August, where I had a 42 for no reason. And I just ovulated a little later or whatever. And I'd noticed that, oh, every couple years I have one like that. And it's not necessarily a big deal, or that's just what my body does. And so
Yeah.
that was super helpful for me. It was also helpful for me to see 28 to 30. And then over the last couple years, before I started skipping, it'll come down. So then it'll be like 25, 26, like shorter. But then I saw it didn't just suddenly go 25, 26. Like it just started over time getting less and less. And I might still throw a 27, 28 in there, but basically they got shorter and then skip and then longer or whatever. And it's longer. But yeah, just seeing that over the last few years has been really helpful and really
Yeah.
helpful for me when women come to me to consult and be like, oh, that's what it does. And also for me to pin to ask them questions. Is it doing, not that mine is right, but is it doing this? And then talk to more. And have you seen this phenomenon? And then yes, and then have it begin to have a sense. So.
And that's how we learned is like from our experiences and the experiences of the women around us. Like that's how we like create the narrative. I'm curious, has your luteal phase gotten shorter? Has it stayed pretty much the same?
No, it's pretty much the same. It's a good 12 to 14, pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah. And interestingly, I was talking to a friend of mine who's older, and she had not had her period in 3 or 4 years. And she said, I think she was like 58, 59. And she said she was like, oh my gosh, I'm ovulating. She said she could tell, like she got mucus again and her breasts were sore right before. And then sure enough, like boom, she had a period. And of course, that's a big freak out in the medical world. And so she went ahead and subjected herself to all that, like endometrial biopsies, because if you're this and that, and she was like, yeah, I'm doing it. Just, I don't know. She even said herself, I don't know why I'm doing this. She's because I know I just ovulated. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like you had a one off like that far later, which is wild. And she was in tune enough to recognize before then, because she said even when it was happening, she was like, wait, am I ovulating again? So yeah, we joke about that rogue egg that like,
One more thing needed to be created through her
yeah.
in that sense. Yeah, gosh, it's just so beautiful to think about like how intelligent our bodies are, like beyond. We can understand so much through the lens of our hormones, but there's also so much that's just outside of that lens. Yeah, charting your cycles. I mean, do you feel like you said when you were younger, you were just like taking ibuprofen and putting a tampon in? That's typical teenage stuff. So do you feel like when you stopped using the birth control and started charting your cycle, was that kind of when you shifted to being a little bit more natural minded, or was that always a little
Yeah,
bit?
I was also traveling around and we were eating more natural food and sleeping outside a lot, like sleeping in tents, sleeping in cars, like outside in nature and,
Nice.
all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's where I met the first women that I had known that had home birthed, really.
Wow.
Yeah.
And were you thinking about having kids at that time? Were you partnered yet? What, or were you just interested
No,
in the
I always knew I wanted to have kids. I always knew I wanted to have kids and I always felt like I knew I wanted to have a lot of children. And no, I wasn't partnered. I was just, you know, with
into
partners.
it?
Not.
Yep, that's part of the story too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious if there's something you want to share about conception, fertility, your journey to having children, any of your pregnancies, like in that realm.
Yeah. So the first one was so I had a couple of pregnancy scares, and I think that happens like where you have pregnancy scares or your period comes late, or you just have this feeling that it wasn't what it could be. And it's you have so many of those that's built in, even if that's stories you made up or perhaps it truly happened. But I never did get pregnant any of those times that I know of, but I had these pregnancy scares. So I had built myself up on the sense that it was going to happen immediately. Therefore, like as soon as I was trying during those times that it would just happen and it didn't for us. And so my husband and I were both in residency at the time and we were both working like ungodly hours. And yeah, we'd be on call every third or every fourth night. And so he'd be gone some nights, I'd be gone. And also it was stressful. And so then I freaked out when it wasn't happening in the first couple months. Like I was like, what's wrong? Because I just assumed that it would happen. And it was the first month that neither of us had call because you could also have non-call months where you were like just in the office from like more 9 to 5, Monday through Friday type thing. It was the first time that our off-call months coincided
Oh, well,
that we got pregnant.
of course.
Yeah, I know. It just was. And so that was something that was interesting to me. And then so I had 5 babies in 8 years. And so
Wow.
pretty much I would get okay, so my postpartums, yeah, I've talked about that. Other places were really not great. I didn't even I trained as a midwife first and then I went to medical school, but none of it was all of it was like, see you in 6 weeks. Don't lift anything heavier than the baby. And then they would come back at 6 weeks and you do their pap smear and ask them about birth control. And then that was it. You're free to do
Yeah.
what you want to. That's what postpartum is.
No, it's so sad.
And that's essentially the postpartum care I gave myself. Oh, I feel fine. And I didn't really, I developed a lot of issues from that I've spoken about other places with prolapse and
Right. Yeah.
all of that. But basically each time my period would come back and I'd have a cycle or two and it would come back between 11 and 15 months and I'd get pregnant again because we just were
Wow.
open to it. And it happened again and again and again.
Yeah, kind of amazing. It's just, I really enjoy hearing women's stories who have had a lot of back-to-back pregnancies because I'm like, wow, that's like how many years that you were just like constantly pregnant or breastfeeding or postpartum. And I feel like that's just cool to just be fully in that phase of life. And it's just you're in it for that amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like 11 years for me that I was either pregnant, breastfeeding, or both.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was just like, yeah. And I blessed, but each time that's just what kind of happened. And I did a truly hideous job taking care of myself postpartum any of the times. And like my first one, I was back to work. I was in residency then, back to work full residency hours, which is 80 to 100 a week at 4 weeks to the day.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
4 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I had a kind of a breakdown 2 weeks into it, and then they let me have another couple weeks and I could do an at-home project. But I actually was really resentful for a long time because I was in a family medicine program and I was like, this is family medicine residency. But I also worked up until the day I gave birth. So I was 10 days over my due date or whatever. And so they accommodated me by allowing me to be in office every day rather than like on the on-call schedules. But so I worked every day, a full day in the office every single day. So that way my 4 weeks could start truly the day I gave birth. And that's what it was. And then, yeah, I think I just had this break. Honestly, it was like a break. Like I was pumping all the time, pumping constantly. We had a live-in nanny. I would go and multiple times during the day would go pump. When I was on call in the hospital, my husband used to come and I would be in the call room and he would bring the baby and he would sleep on the floor and I would sleep like in the cot with the baby. And so if I got called, I went out and then he would hold the baby till I came back. And that was in addition to his call that he was doing at his hospital on the other 12 days. So
That's crazy.
was wild. And then as soon as I woke up and realized, I was just like, that's absolutely awful. Like, how could any of those people have put me through that? I put myself through it. So I'm not taking it totally from victim mode, but I was like, this is family medicine residency. Like, there's no family
Yeah.
in here. That's like the story of a lot of medicine, unfortunately. And that, yeah.
But yeah, it just reminds me it's just that system isn't supportive of families, actually. It's not supportive of the actual biological, physiological needs of mothers and babies, which, probably most people, women listening to this podcast are aware of that, but not a lot of people in our culture realize that system isn't really designed like it's like its own thing. It's not based on a lot of like biological reality, but it's just become the dominant paradigm of like how to go through rites of passage, which
Mhm.
is quite sad because what happens is like the birth control becomes the first like rite of passage that gets co-opted with menarche and then birth control usually coming right after. And then, like you said, your birth and postpartum getting co-opted. And then that's how women end up on hormone replacement therapy. And at some point, you have to choose to jump off that wagon. And it happens at different times in everyone's timeline. But yeah, I'm curious. So you said all of your postpartums were not very nurtured. So at what point did you jump off this bandwagon?
So even when I had my own practice and I had the ability to, I didn't. For a long time, I didn't. And so we I jumped off between my right when I had my fifth. And so honestly, we had outgrown our home
Mm,
and we were looking for a new home. And we were looking for a new home with nanny quarters, like
okay.
to have nanny quarters. And then something about that house search or with a carriage house where a nanny could be,
Mhm.
something about that house search, I was like, I don't know. I woke up and I was like, I don't think I want another woman with my children more than I am. Like,
Mm,
it was something about the house search because I was had a babysitter that I was paying, but she didn't live with us. And I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I stepped back. I stepped back from doing births at that time. I really stepped down to where I was just working a couple days a week in someone else's office. And I think that's actually right when I conceived my fifth. So that was after my fourth.
okay.
Um, no, it was when I was pregnant with my fourth. And
Okay.
then I think my fourth and fifth are the two closest together. And I
Mm,
think that's part of the reason why. But yeah, I was up and around and driving carpool and probably, I'm sure within the week with any of those. But yeah, the fifth came in. And then, so my practice is called Full Circle because I started doing herbalism and midwifery and more natural things. And then I did my like more medicalized midwifery training, medical school, all of that. And then when I came back around, it was actually when I just talked about those 11 years of pregnant or breastfeeding or both. It was my weaning from my fifth child. And I went to go to a conference and I went to go to actually a training. It was Tammy Lynn Kent's holistic pelvic care training. And that was my weaning present to myself was to go to that conference. And then at that training on like day two, it was like everything hit that I wasn't going to go back and do regular medical practice anymore. That was done, that I was going to go back and do something totally different. And so
Mm.
it was at the tail end of all that.
Wow. I love that. I didn't know that origin story of your business name. That's so beautiful. Full circle. Yeah. It's like coming back to your roots, like coming back to what was actually true in the first place. Yeah, take me to what kind of comes next. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about some of your daughter's first bleed.
Yeah. Yeah. So that segue is good because I started my own practice. So then I had my own office. And then I had a friend of mine, her name's Amy Wilding. So she wrote the book like Wise and Wild. That's like a
Oh yeah, I know. I know that book. It's like a women's circles book, right?
when I moved into my new offices, Amy came over and looked, and it was actually apartment, like a second floor apartment, and there were the 2 bedrooms we used as treatment rooms, and then there was like a living room, dining room area where we held class circles, but mine had access to the attic. And so Amy came up, and there was just storage. My landlords had it there, and Amy came over one time to check it all out, and we walked up, and she like literally fell to her knees when we got to the top floor, and she goes, "Oh, this would make the perfect red tent." And
Ah,
so we decked it out. It was amazing because it was low down in there, and we did decked it with beautiful fabric all around and beautiful rugs and chairs. And then
oh.
Amy started holding circles, and I would hold circles up there. And so as like a rent exchange, I would get to go to her circles for free or whatever. And so she was having this mother-daughter circle. And it was this mother-daughter retreat. And she was like, "Oh, so for the rent for this, we exchange." We just exchanged all the time. Like sometimes it's comical now because sometimes we maybe get $25 back and forth, but we were like, and so she was offering this retreat for mothers and daughters, and it was a weekend retreat. And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that'd be great." And so my eldest daughter was like 9 at the time, 9, almost 10. And I was like, "Yeah, great." So I took her. I honestly never read what it was about or knew. And so it was supposed to be Friday night till Sunday afternoon. Well, I didn't show up till Saturday morning. Then I got in with her, and then she was like, "Will you sign this form?" And it was like a consent form. And I'm like, "That's weird. Okay, whatever. That's weird. She's having me sign a consent form." I got in there, and we sit with the mothers and daughters, and then we open this beautiful booklet that she had made with like ribbons tied, and it was like a vulva, a picture of a vulva right there. And it was all like your anatomy. And so she started
Whoa.
through, and over the next 2 days, we spent this time together, and she went through anatomy. And at first, I have to tell you, when I was sitting there, I was like, "Oh, this is what we're doing." I had no idea when I signed my daughter up that. And if I would have known, I probably would have thought I needed to wait till she was older, right?
Mm, yeah.
And now in retrospect, no. But at the time, I would have been like, "Hey, are we ready for this?" So she went through this beautiful weekend of female anatomy, male anatomy, and what is sexual intercourse, where do babies come from, all of this. And it was so beautiful. The girls, like, we made these beautiful mandalas, and my daughter made one that was like maiden mother crone that I still have framed up in my house today. And like, the girls did this play about ovulation, and they had these
Mm.
scarves, all of this great stuff. And it was really great. And so we were driving back because it was from out in the state, and all the way we drive. She says nothing this whole time. And literally we're turning on my street in the neighborhood. And she was like, "Mom, I have a question." And I was like, "Okay," gripping the steering wheel.
Yeah.
"Okay, here we go." And she is, "So if you and dad have 5 babies, does that mean you had sexual intercourse 5 times?" Yep. I just said yes because I'm like, "That's the and went on. And for the years as that played out with my daughter, that class was such a blessing because I think she was in like fourth grade or third or fourth grade. And then I remember one of the girls had gotten a hold of their mom's phone and looked up what is sex. And then, of course, and then all this porn came on. And the question was who had seen the porn on the phone and all of this. It was this big flip out. And I was like, Leah just knows, like, she knows that. And So then I told other moms, and so then a lot of other moms ended up their daughters, but I felt like our daughters were not getting swept up in that as much. They were able to
Mhm.
tell what was true versus what was not true because they had that basis. And then with my other daughters, so I had one other biologic daughter, but then I adopted four daughters as well.
Mhm.
And we did that class with all of them. I did that class with all of them. And it was such a blessing for them each and every time. And I'd be like, yeah, 8, 9, let's go. Let's go do it.
Oh.
And then actually we got like at the groups at their school, a lot of their school classmates would do it, their friends would do it. And so those girls came through with that knowledge. And so my first daughter, oh, also one of the other things we did, yeah, it was so beautiful. So the mother spent time telling about their first period and what was that like. So the girls got to hear it. Most of them before hadn't had their periods yet. So they got to hear this. They got to hear the mother stories. And then on the final day on all of them, there would be a ceremony where the mothers would dress in red and the girls would dress in white. And then they would come into the circle and be welcomed and go to eat. So the Amy would drape them in a red scarf, like over their white, and then they would go to each mother for a blessing, and each mother would give them a blessing as they went through the circle. And so
Mm.
it set my daughters up. They all have their red scarves now. It set them up. She went through all the practical stuff too, like what are cups and what are pads and what are this and that. And these bleached tampons, don't put those in your
Look
butt.
at
Like
that.
we did all the nuts and bolts of it too. And
Yeah.
so my daughter played volleyball and she was like in 7th grade, my eldest, and I went to go pick her up. So she had gone from school to volleyball. I'd picked her up from volleyball. She was in white shorts. So this is like the classic nightmare story, right? She's in nightmare shorts. She's sitting shotgun and she's, yeah, I got my period today. And she opens her leg and there's a big blood, like blood all over her shorts. And I was like, oh, so I was like freaking out if she's not freaking out. And then I was like, she's, yeah, I started my period today. And she's, I just wrapped up toilet paper and put it up there, like Amy said. And I'm like, okay. And then she was like, I was like, we're driving. And I was like, were you worried about the blood and all over your pants? And she goes, nobody's noticing that. It,
Oh.
that was it. We went home, we got our stuff, it was done. And compared to most stories, like the white shorts and the practice, and she was like, nobody noticed. And she was just, it was just totally, this is like whenever it was, like 3, 4 years later for her from that first initial, but the time we had done the class, that was it for her. And I took her out that night and we went over to my mom's house. We got red velvet cake.
Oh.
We got red velvet cake and we went to Grammy's house and we got 3 pieces of red velvet cake for us from the local like bakery. And I went over and told my mom. And so we all ate the cake together. And so that's been the little ritual we do with each of my daughters as they get red velvet cake. And I just find out something really funny last night because I was talking about coming on this podcast and was looking at it with my daughter, with my a different daughter who's 19 now. And she's, oh, it's about period. It's about periods and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's called mysteries,
Yeah.
And she was like, are you going to tell him about that time that I faked it so I could get the red velvet cake? And I was like,
What?
what? I never till last night. And I go, you faked it? So you get a red velvet cake? And she goes, yeah, I really wanted red velvet cake. So she was like, so I was like willing it to come on. And she was like, and it didn't really come. And she was like, she goes, now it's just interesting. So she's 19 now. So she goes, I think it was my first period because there was a little bit of mud or something. That's what she said. She goes, and so probably that's why I was craving that red velvet cake. She goes, but I told you it was, and you got it, and you took me to Grammy's, and we all ate red velvet cake. And I was like, when did you actually get in? She's 3 or 4 months later. Dying. I just found that out last
And
night.
you just found it out.
I
Oh,
just found it out last night.
oh, that's so funny. But you know what I love about that, and what I also love about your oldest daughter getting hers with the white shorts, like those two stories, they just had zero shame about getting their period. It was just like, yeah. I love that. And that's what's, I'm laughing because it's really funny. I've had actually a couple women on who either pretended they got their period before they did or pretended they didn't get their period. And so it's interesting to see which way that kind of goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think that's what happens when girls are like informed and come into their rite of passage with a background of knowledge. They can feel confident. And so when it arrives, it's not like this chaotic stress, what do I do thing. And it's just that sets the stage for the other rites of passage, just like birth, just like
Mhm.
postpartum, just like menopause. When you can hear about what's going to happen, and of course, everyone's experience is going to be unique. But when the baseline of what that this is going to happen, this is what the deal is, then you
Yeah.
can come into that with just like more confidence. And I think that's, yeah, really beautiful. What a wonderful experience that your girls got to have. And also, it was so interesting when you were sharing that because my first period was in seventh grade after volleyball practice. Oh, not as I think I was quite a bit more nervous about it and confused. But yeah, wow, that's so beautiful. And the red velvet cake is so sweet.
Yeah.
And what are like your daughter's relationships with their periods like now? Is it pretty chill? Do they live
It
like kind of,
depends. It varies from daughter to daughter. It
yeah.
really varies. And one of my adopted daughters had already had hers before she came. And I think it's just interesting. I'm sure it's interesting for them. I'm sure, what it's like to have me as a mother. And I just have a lot of anybody who has a mother who's like a midwife or a women's health practitioner or whatever, because I also at their school teach can be called sex ed. I don't usually call it sex. I call it reproductive anatomy and physiology. And so I
Yeah.
come and teach the middle schoolers at the school. So they have all had to sit through me, even my son, as the one who brings that in. And
That's so
a lot
funny.
of just funny stories with that too. But they're used to seeing it and used to seeing it around. And they know that it's not, that I'm open.
Yeah. Yeah. And do your kids still live with you? Are they all at the age where they're still?
I have five still with me. So I have nine total, five still live with me.
Okay. I was gonna say, is there certain, I guess your cycles are a bit different now, but I'm curious, did you all sync up? What was it like in the house when someone was bleeding? What was that
It
energy?
was interesting. It's interesting. And what you said about some people hiding it, like some of my daughters are still like not necessarily talking about being on their cycle and that or whatever. And one thing that I thought, so you love your daughters so much. I love my daughter so much. And it was hard for me every single one that left. Nobody tells you what it's like, I feel like when your kids are gonna leave. And
Mhm.
there was also with me with nine, like you want to launch your children, like you want them to launch, you want to become successful adults. Like from the very beginning, you're like, how can I help them grow into their fullest capacities and find their God-given work and be happy, healthy humans on this planet at this time, right?
Uh,
I know it's coming, but I was deeply like surprised at just so my eldest is my son and just how challenging that was for him leaving.
mm,
And then 2 years later, my eldest daughter left, and it was so hard. Like, just bought, like, she was crying, I was crying. This is going off to college. And there's something different in particular with a daughter,
yeah.
like with them leaving. I don't know. It's just different. But I will tell you, because I
Mm.
was like, why does it happen like where my teens are coming into their cycles and they're teenagers and I'm going through perimenopause and the hormones are really wacky? Like it's not regular. Usually for teens, it's not really regular and it can be pretty dysregulated to begin.
Yeah.
I don't want to even call it dysregulated. It is what it is to begin with. It can be
Yeah.
like more rocky
Yeah.
few months and then I was like, why is this happening? And sometimes I'm like, what is God's plan or what is evolution's plan or and then I was like, oh, so we'll let them go. That's what it's felt like. Sometimes I'm like, oh, because sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, I could let her go out of my house. Even as much as I said it was difficult, I'm like, that must be what it is, because
Oh, that's so
otherwise we just would have our hearts torn out with them bleeding. But then sometimes, so we made these really beautiful, it's something that Amy taught us, this really beautiful, just, it's like when you make a clock for a kid, but it was 4 cycles of
wow.
the 4 seasons. So it's the 4 seasons. So just to have a sense of having that 4 season up. So we made quadrants and did winter, spring, summer,
Yeah.
fall, and then just have it on there. So that was successful for a little while to have our clock. I feel like we should have just had them all lined up in the kitchen because it's wild.
Yes.
There's 7 of us, like, uh,
Wow.
all lined up in the kitchen and who's on what. But
That
that
would
was
be
something
so
that I
cool.
found really helpful. And I think in my girls coming in, and we talked about girls coming into minute, they start cycling before they actually have their first bleed typically. And that was another good reason to talk to them about it earlier. And we made that 4 seasons to get that sense. And with
Yeah.
the very first one, she just had these big emotions. You have big emotions coming into puberty. And I actually had a list on my phone that was called, she found it years later. It was called Leah's Crazy Bad Days. But it was like the days when she'd have a huge fit and be screaming and out in the backyard, and you'd be like, what? What is it? Like, what's happening? Like, I don't understand. And then I noticed that charting those, that those were actually starting to fall in a cycle. And
Wow.
um, it wasn't long after that that she got our first moon. And so, yeah. But
I
yeah,
mean,
that
how
was really
cool,
funny
like,
years later when she was like, Mom, what's Leah Crazy Bad Days? And I'm like, that was from a long time ago. I
don't
was like,
worry about it.
figure out what's good.
Like, what is this? What I love about that is that you were charting it, that like you had this charting practice with your cycle, and somewhere in you, you were like, let's see what's going on here. And that because of what you have done for yourself, you were able to recognize that pattern for your daughter. And I think that's the gift that any woman who learns about her own cycle and comes home to her own body gives to her daughters, is like she's able to provide that structure and understanding. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I really try now, both in my own. Most moms totally get that. And if you say to them, is your daughter's coming in and getting her period, or is your daughter's? We all know what that feels like and want to create the space and want to give them the tea and tell them it's okay not to do XYZ that day and teach them those self-care practices. And I've really tried to hold on to that both for myself and the perimenopausal women that I sit with. Treat yourself how you would treat your daughter. Like when she was first, because most women are pretty tender around their daughter. I was charting crazy bad days, but pretty tender around holding her through that transition. And just that concept of, can we hold ourselves through perimenopause and coming into menopause around that transition with that same thought that, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And that brings it, as we say, full circle. Yeah. Yeah, I think it really is like that. If we can honor each sort of turn of the wheel in womanhood, we get better at honoring the next one. And what how we treat ourselves at Menarch is directly reflected in how we feel at menopause. Yeah, I know we talked about where you are now already, but is there anything else you want to share about this time in your life?
No, I don't think so. I think I went into it. Okay. I'm going to say one other thing that sister
Yeah.
said I've really been pondering. I'm trying to remember what she called it now. I feel like it was like your crone year. I think she called it your crone year.
Mm.
She says to me, matter of factly, it's something. I was like, oh, my cycle's, and she's, are you planning to take your crone year? And I was like, what is that? And she was like, you have your cycle ends, and then you have the full year, and then you're officially, quote unquote, in menopause for the full year. And then that next year after that, you take yourself away. And the way sister said it is like you move your teepee away, out away from the others, and take that year. And she said, because what the tribe needs then, they need wisdom at that point and no longer. Yeah. And so and so I was like, this was blowing my mind. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, I'd have to figure out because now I'm doing births. So I'm on call for births. And so part of me, as I look forward, I'm like, what would it be to take a crony? What would that look like? And so I was like, I'd have to figure it out a lot ahead of time, like with my practice of seeing women and with my births that I take on. And so I started rattling off all this stuff. And she's, yes. And I was like, oh. So I'm pondering that idea, that
Wow.
concept of, I know it would be amazing, but then the practice, there's something about like withdrawing from my work now that's almost like this fear that it somehow wouldn't be there. And so I'm playing with this, like, how much of myself am I and who I am? How much does that sit on work? And if I'm not working, or also, what does that take financially? And there's that whole piece of it. Because I was like, yeah, and finances, choose one word, yes. And but that's what she said. They no longer need you to gather knowledge, something like that. They need you, and to gather knowledge, they need your wisdom. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, so I'm thinking about this, like what could, and I have no, like when I say it and I feel it, like taking time to like really deepen into that whatever transformation it's going to be. I'm like, yeah. And then I wonder about the practicality of all of that and what it means. And so that's something I've been playing with. So part of me is, even as I'm sitting 85 days out from my last bleed, was that it? Okay, so then 1 year from back then, or that was one other thing I had to share that I'm playing with and
Wow.
contemplating, and what would that mean to step back from some of the commitments and take that year to really deepen in. What would that even look like? And
Wow. Yeah, I gotta love Sister Morningstar for just dropping these things so casually all the time.
like, yeah, are you planning on taking a year?
She's
And
like,
I was,
yeah, you do it. It's interesting because it makes a lot of sense. I like what she said about they need your wisdom, not your like gathering knowledge, because and then you being like, wait, but can I do that? Am I okay with that? I feel like that's such a from your mothering years to your crone years pondering of, wait, but I have to slow down and I'm going to be like a wisdom keeper now. I feel like that's so normal to be trying to negotiate this new era you're entering into. And it's also a very like menopause theme to be like, wait, how much of my identity is in my work and what is my identity and who do I like? That's such a theme of this time. And because it's common and normal doesn't make it like an easy pondering to have. Of course, it's like big life altering like questions that you're asking yourself, but I love that you're willing to do it. Well, speaking of wisdom, the last question I always ask is if there's a piece of womb wisdom you'd like to leave with the women listening, what that might be.
yeah. I think that my piece of womb wisdom is mainly trust. Trust your body, and your body is, and your womb's wisdom, and even what it's physically, how that's physically manifesting through our physical bodies is for you. Your womb does not lie. It does not lie. Our heads lie to us a lot. Our hearts can like lie to us because we get this really heart opening sometimes where we really want. And I feel like the deeper down you go, not that the head's not needed. We have to negotiate through modern age. So we need our head voice and we certainly need our heart voice. But then we start talking about gut feelings and people are like, ooh, they get those. When you drop down like to the root voice and to your womb wisdom, it does not lie, and it is for you. And so often I sit with women that are concerned with something's wrong, that, oh, my hormones must not be right. Oh, I'm malfunctioning in some way. And I think the wisdom is to, first of all, listen to your own womb wisdom, your own medicine that you're in your medicine bowl, that your body's making for you. And the other is, what if it's not broken? What if it's not malfunctioning? What if it's doing this for you?
Mm, yeah, I love that. Oh, Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. I know that women are going to be wanting to look you up and find out all of the things you do. So I'd love to give you a space to just share where women can find you and what you have to offer.
Sure. I'm at fullcircleholistic.com and I'm on Insta at fullcircleholistic. So in my community here, we hold women's circles, we hold village prenatals, we hold birth story sharing circles. And I also do one-on-one work with women, whether in person or virtual, both of those.
Perfect. Love it. And you're in remind the woman where you're located.
Louisville, Kentucky.
I didn't want to say it because I don't say it right.
Louisville, Louisville is but
Well, no, I wouldn't say
say
that.
Louisville. I'm totally, yeah.
It's like the little twang. I can't quite. Oh, Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. It's been such an honor witnessing you and your stories and your daughter's stories. And yeah, like what a beautiful conversation too about the perimenopausal and menopausal time. That's just so important. And I know so many women need to hear. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you for tuning into the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly such an honor to bring these stories forward to you, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it could reach more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to join our online community, the Cyclical Living Circle, in the show notes below. There, you'll also find the links to book one-on-one virtual sessions, shop the herbal shop, and any group programs that I'm currently offering. Plus, you can follow me on Instagram, and I love to connect with you all there. All right, see you next week.